If I mention the word Renfrew, what comes to your mind? Take a moment and just let some thoughts and images run through your mind. Do you think of Renfrew Mill and how important the textile mills were to the backbone of our communities? Or do you think of the vibrant neighborhood that was lined with shade trees and neat manicured yards and pretty white houses, churches and ball fields, and the company store? Or perhaps you remember the boarding house, or being in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, or playing on one of the ball teams, or going to a square dance above Tate's cloth store. Or maybe you remember the annual barbecue on the village, or being able to get a hot dog and a Coke and a haircut for less than 50 cents. Well, tonight we have some very special guests who grew up in the neighborhood, and they will share some of their favorite memories of growing up in Renfrew Village. So tonight we are very happy to have Mrs. Nell Gibson, Mrs. Margaret Hudson, Pat Murphy Carter, Keller, Frank Murphy, and Harvey Tankersley should be here in a few minutes. He's coming from Simpsonville. And then Charles Tate. And we are so happy to have each one of these as our special guest. So join me in welcoming them here tonight to share their memories. We also will have some help from Dot Bishop. So Dot, if you'd like to come and be ready. But we will start with Mrs. Nell Gibson. Nell, you just sit where you are and share with us from your heart what you would like for us to hear tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, some of my best memories are Renfrew. It just seemed to me as I was growing up that we just had one big happy family, and nobody was not a family member. And everybody was willing to help. It didn't matter what your problem was, they were there to help you. And I don't remember the bad times, but my family had some tragedies. But there was always somebody there to help. And then I remember my mother helping even deliver a baby 2 doors down from where we lived. My brother was 6 years older than I, and he was a scout, and he loved to be out and doing things. And on Sunday afternoon, we would go to walk in the woods behind our house. And there was a creek, and we would cross the creek and go over to this wooded area, and it was near the Boy Scout hut, if you all remember where that was. And so one afternoon, we were out walking. He was 6 years older than I. And we saw this dog coming up, and so I, of course, wanted to pet the dog, and I had never been around a dog that was not friendly, but unfortunately, this was my first experience, and the dog attacked my brother, and he threw a knife, a pocket knife to me, and said, unlock the knife. Well, I couldn't do it, so I had to give it back to him. And before the dog decided to leave, it had bitten him 16 times. And most of them were above his neck. And they said that's the most dangerous place you can be. But anyway, we went to the creek that was close by, and I washed his face in his arms. And then we went home, and it was a Sunday afternoon. Dr. Coleman lived on the village, and he was home. And so, of course, my parents took us up there, and I was not bitten, but he immediately got a posse of men to go and look for the dog. Now, how he knew to do that and where he got the men, I do not know. But I know that before night, the posse of men had found the dog, and they were shipping the head to Columbia to be tested. Unfortunately, the dog was rabid. And so he had to have the 21 shots, of course, and I did because I had touched his wounds. And I said, I remember going in his office, which was in his house, and I remember hearing that there were 21 shots, but the only thing I remember now is that there was a bowl of candy. And after the shot, I remembered the candy. So, and now I think about how many men would have been willing to go out looking for a mad dog. And I'm sure it didn't take long, or they couldn't have gotten the results back so quick. We had to burn our clothes, or they had to be burned, everything we had on. And so when I heard that that's no longer necessary, I thought that was a great accomplishment. There were many things there that showed the caring neighborhood. People just looked after everybody else. And I remember the E.E. Boones. I don't know if any of you remember them or not. But anyway, their house burned one night. And everybody was out to see what they could do. Remember the snow, when we had snow, the mill would get a tractor and they would hook the sleds up to the tractor, and all of the children would get on the sleds and we would go around the diamond out in front of our house, in fact. So that was something that I looked forward to. And then I rode the school bus for my first time, and I was, of course, in first grade, and Mr. Goldsmith, now I don't know his first name, but I know Mr. Goldsmith was the driver. And we would meet at the store, and we could go inside until we saw him coming. And one day, it was very cold, so we went in, and I had a new coat, and it was very cold. And unfortunately, I put my elbows down on the top of the stove to keep it warm. And I remember somebody said, "I smell something burning." And it was the sleeves of my new coat. And I tried to wash it off, it didn't work. So, but I don't remember my mother being upset. I'm sure she must have been. But that was one of the things I remember about the store. But other than the fact that I did work in the cloth shop, and the most favorite thing that I did was to fix rag bags. And you took the pieces that were left off from the cloth that had been cut and put them in the bag, and then people would pay not knowing what they were going to get in the bag. And I always liked that because I really didn't know much about cutting cloth in a straight line. And I'm surprised that I wasn't fired the first day. But I walked to school and down a little path that went across the ball diamond, and I thought that was great. Other than the catastrophes that my family had, I just thought Renfrew couldn't be beat. It was just, and everybody knew everybody. And of course, I would go home with Margaret sometime, and I had never seen so much food in my life as they had at the boarding house. And all the people would come in to eat, and I would think about, well, we didn't have but 4 at my table, and they had so much food. It was just unreal. And so I was jealous of Margaret. And I enjoyed being a Girl Scout, and the mill would send us to camp every summer. Well, I really didn't like leaving my home, but I don't remember if I had a choice or not, but I know I was homesick. But of course, I was homesick. I went to Furman and stayed in the dormitory, and I always said I was probably the most homesick person there. I tugged it out 2 years, and then I told Mother I needed to come home. And but anyway, at the camp, we would stay 2 weeks, and the mill would pay for us to go, and they would get a school bus to take us. And we went to Camp Katichi outside of Brevard, and of course it was exciting to start with, but before the 2 weeks were over, I was ready to come home. And a lot of girls went home, but I thought if the meal paid for us to go, I had to stay. And of course it was good for me. But anyway, they would have all kinds of activities, and I thought the other day when I read about the little boy being lost at camp, that we had what they called a game called Indians and Pioneers, and the Indians were to take a pioneer and go up in the mountains. And if you all remember, are familiar with Brevard, there are a lot of mountains up that way. But we were to take the camper up in the woods, and we had big leaves, and you painted numbers on the leaves, and if anybody called out your number, that meant you were dead. And so it was, between the pioneers and Indians. So I was with the group to take the pioneer up into the woods, and we did not have a chaperone. And we wanted to win the prize, so we just kept walking and walking and walking. And it got later and later, and somebody said, we really need to go back. And they said, well, do you think that they'll find us on the way back? And they said, well, they didn't know, but they thought we needed to go back. When we got back to the campground, and there was nobody there. And about that time, a bus drove up, and all these people began to get out of the bus, and they had gone to get people to come and look for us. And said we didn't have a chaperone, and do whatever we wanted to do. So that night they were going to have a square dance and invite a boys' camp over. And all of our counselors were so worn out from looking for us, they weren't interested in participating in the square dance. And I was embarrassed. I don't know if anybody else was. But then I look back on it, we should have had somebody with us to tell us we'd gone far enough. But Renfrew did that every summer. They would send us, and I think they sent the boys too, didn't they? Yeah. And I remember we had a program at the First Presbyterian Church in Greenville to recognize Girl Scouts. And the day before the program, I was over at Gigi Williams, and we were riding bicycles and playing, and I rode a bicycle across the yard, and they had a water spout up in the front yard, and I hit the water spout and went over the top. And so I had this big gash on my forehead and had to go to the doctor. I forgot who. It was a Saturday, so I don't know who saw me. But anyway, I had the doctor's attention, and I did not want to go the next day because I had this big bandage on my head, and Mother insisted that I go. So I went. And everybody would say, oh, they practiced first aid on you. And that made it even worse. Because I didn't want the attention. But anyway, I often thought about Renfrew and I wondered how many times they had sent boys and girls, up there. And of course they built the cabin, the Boy Scout and Girl Scout huts, and the mothers made uniforms, and they just contributed so much. And even after, those of you who had people who worked there, they would give you fruit baskets at Christmas time. And even after my father had been retired for years, they would bring a fruit basket. And he would be so surprised, and they always did it. But anyway, I have said that it was a great experience for me to be at Renfrew, and I met so many people and made so many friends and felt so comfortable there. And it's quite a experience that's, I believe, unlike many that other people had. And my hat's off to Renfrew Bleachery and what they did for their employees. I've talked too much, but I don't get to talk about Renfrew very much. And I'm sure I'll think of a lot of other things later. And Margaret can tell us a lot too about that food.
Thank you so much. Question and answer time, if time permits at the end. Margaret, would you like to tell us a few things about the boarding house? Okay.
No. I wrote my notes. So
Well, good. I'm going to slide this over so it'll be easy for us to hear you.
any of you remember seeing the boarding house, it was a very large house. And you walk in and there's a huge living room, sitting room for our boarders. And it had a fireplace. The room was heated with a fireplace. And the boarders would gather there mostly after supper and just sit around and talk. Of course, no TV, but we had a radio that played the radio sometime. And they could just come and go as they pleased. The doors were never locked. And it was a large dining area, and it had 2 tables as long as all of these, almost this long, to serve the meals. And we served, I say we, 3 meals a day. And also in the dining room was a large hot water heater, and that's with the hot water for the entire house. In the wintertime, it felt good, and the boarders would come downstairs and huddle around that fire, hot water heater. But then in the summertime, it was a different thing. Sit as far away as they could get. And the only other heat, well, of course, was the kitchen stove, but also fireplaces. That's how we have wood or either coal to heat them. And all the meals were served family style. Pass it around. Now, if one day we had fried chicken, they'd say, but first come, first serve, got the best pieces. And my mother and my grandmother, Grandma lived with us. That's all I can remember. Then we had Elsie McCarroll, which was a lady that, there was a street that ran behind the boarding house. I don't know if any of you remember that street. And housed workers from Renfrew. And Elsie, mother hired her to come and help Grandma and herself prepare the meals. Elsie's husband, Frank, worked at the mill, and he would come every evening and come in the kitchen and sit down and have a meal. And also they had a daughter named Bobby Lee. And she was about my age or a little younger. And we spent a lot of time playing together. She was one of my playmates. Bobby Lee would come with her mother in the mornings if it's not school, and we'd just get together and play. She was like a family. And the meals were prepared it was a big wood stove, and it had 4 or 6 eyes on it. And I always wondered how Grandma controlled the heat and in the oven to bake the bread and cakes and pies. But she knew how much wood and how much coal to keep in the stove. The boarders would pay $7 a week for room and board. And most of them would go home on the weekends. And all the dishes, pots and pans would be washed by hand. And thinking back, that was a lot of dishwashing. And we had some that worked on the second shift. So every day Mama would pack lunches and sit them on the counter, and they knew to come to the kitchen and get their lunch. One's on the second shift. And you think, well, where'd they get all the groceries for that many people? We bought them down at the country store and company store. Then on Saturday, Daddy would load up the car with children and go to Greenville. And on the way home, he would stop at the A&P store and buy a big bag of 8 o'clock coffee. I remember that at the A&P. And another thing, I don't ever remember us having toast, because Grandma get up and make biscuits every morning, sometimes 3 times a day. And there was first of all, 3 bedrooms downstairs, and that's where we lived, in those bedrooms, the family. And with 1 bathroom. And it was built later, I guess, off from the back porch. So you had to go out the kitchen and from the back porch to go to the bathroom. And that was for our family. And upstairs, where the boarders lived, there were 4 bedrooms, 1 bath. Now, how did that, and I think about them showering, how did that warm hot water here build enough hot water for all those showers? And another responsibility my mother had was cleaning the house. And most of the time, it was just her by herself. And she had to do the laundry on the bed linens, their towels, and it was a wringer type washing machine. Then had a big tin tub with water, and after you go through the washer and the wringer, you put them in the tub to rinse the clothes. Then she would have to put them in a container, take them out in the backyard, hang them on the clothesline. And looking back, that was a really busy time for my family, and especially Mother. And of course, Daddy was working at the mill too. But all the boarders, I gotta say, they were all gentlemen, well-mannered. You never heard any bad language from them. So we were like, Nell said, like family. And that's my story.
that Ruth could hit a baseball further than any boy on the village. My sister.
There was a shortage of girls, and so the girls that liked ball had to play with the boys, because there wasn't enough girls. We got started early.
Or sometimes there were too many girls.
So no.
That was there.
Well, I talk loud anyway.
Well, you get up everywhere you hear.
Well, I spent my whole life, I guess, at Renfrew. That was where everything started for me. I was born at 10 Circle Street, up on top of the hill there above the Renfrew Baptist Church, and Dr. Gaston came to the house and delivered me, and I cost $25. That's where he started. And he recorded when he put the drops in my eyes and everything. And Frank and Ann were so disappointed. They were counting on a boy. So they asked my mother if they could send me back. Good boy. But anyway, it was a really great place to be a kid. They provided everything for us, and as we said, we had the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and they took really good care of our houses. Everything was always well kept, and we were just free to roam the whole community. We were safe, and Harvey lived on around Circle Drive there, I think. And we knew everybody that lived in every house. We could just name it. And if we were anywhere that we needed help, we could go to that house, and they would help you immediately. And it just was a unique place to be. And I just remember all the celebrations we had for the 4th of July, very patriotic, supported all the ball teams. We had tennis court, basketball court, big playground, and of course we had the Baptist church, and then later they were infiltrated with the Presbyterians and the Methodists. We were so small, we had to meet in one church. They shared, Methodist one Sunday, Presbyterian the next.
But originally, all three met in the little church out there in left field.
Right, left field, right, yeah, okay. But and it was a real religious community. I mean, everybody's home was God-centered, it seemed like, and everybody was good and honest people. And I remember one of my best memories, well, and I'll tell you about being homesick. When we moved from 10 Circle Street down to the boarding house when they closed it up and just made it a single family residence, I was homesick. That was like 200 yards. And Mr. Fred Coleman lived upstairs, the organist at the church, some Presbyterian churches. But it was just a really great place to grow up, and we were always felt privileged, really. We had indoor plumbing, running water. You know, we didn't have a refrigerator because the iceman had to come every week and bring ice. And we didn't have a lot of cabinets. I remember my mom had one of those Hoosier things where she made biscuits. And we even had a piano in our home, and I just thought that was just wonderful, that we were exposed to music early, and we were encouraged to do stuff, and the kids were encouraged to be entrepreneurial and inventive, you know. Like we thought one time, I mean, we just made up a game where we would take 10 cans and hammer them onto our shoes, and then we'd go down the road pretending we were horses. Well, we had a good time. cheap entertainment. But I remember one of my best memories was when I would hear the church bell ringing down at the little Methodist Presbyterian church, and I would start out to walk. We lived at the boarding house, and I walked down by the mill and across the baseball field. And I just felt like God was calling, you know. It just was really a good atmosphere to be in and to grow up. And then, of course, they picked us up in the school buses and took us to school, and we found out how deprived we were. That we were just mill kids that had to struggle to make a name. But anyway, I brought with me today, I kept all these years, my dad and Mom always got the Quill magazine. I got a couple of things I was going to show Dot. I'm going to take them out. But anyway, it was a little magazine that the mill printed called Quills, and it told about the mill people and what their jobs were. And that's me and Charles Yates on the front. It was a Halloween thing, and they just picked us out. We don't know why. Anyway, they picked us out to be on the cover of the magazine, and I saved it all these years. It even has my dad's address sticker on it. I kept it in a little container to keep it safe. But anyway, it told about the life of the mill people. Any of you want to look at it, you can. But it's a picture story of life of a mill family. And pretty much all of us led the same life. You know, we were all felt like we were on equal footing, and we just had the same experiences. You know, they got up and they went to work, provided for their families. And I still remember those fruit baskets, by the way. They were not shabby.
They were, and
And
they
that
were
was really
faithful to give
enjoyable.
them out.
Yeah. And they paid for us to go to camp way back whenever that was a new camp they built.
If I remember correctly, I think they would pay up to 4 weeks for Boy Scout camp.
Boy
Yeah.
Scouts,
I
yeah.
only stayed 2.
Yeah, too.
They threatened to throw y'all out.
Yeah.
Had to come home because they were
I know.
misbehaving.
Yeah.
But that was a great experience too. And we got to meet girls from the city and all around when we went up there, and just had a great time. And they taught us to swim and to do all kind of outdoor things and earn badges. And our meeting place was above the
Above the store.
above the store.
Yeah.
they
Boys met out
provided-
there a lot, but we met in our cabin over
They
there.
We had a
had a
great cabin, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
That
yeah.
we'd build a big fire in there.
Girls weren't on,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, equal, it wasn't equal then. So we got to meet above the company store, and they got to meet over in their shack.
Then later on, right behind where Roy Foster lived over there, didn't
Yeah.
they build a
Yeah.
little?
That was the cabin.
That was
The-
girls was right up,
Yeah,
right
the
behind those houses.
Behind the
Down
house.
behind the Methodist church, on down there
Yeah.
was the boys on up in
Yeah.
the woods.
Yeah. But as I said, I felt very privileged. It was just a wonderful upbringing, and our parents, all of our parents always worked to give us the best they could, and it seemed like that was in every household. It was that way. The parents were hardworking and tried to provide the best for their kids and give us a better life than they had. And I just feel really privileged that I can say I'm a Renfrew girl.
I don't know, I echoed the sentiment that it was family, and it was very much family. In fact, Larry Farmer, his mother, if he got in trouble, she gave him castor oil. And if I was with him, I got castor oil. So they would discipline us as we went through
Or
our.
they would tell your daddy.
Yeah.
They knew your daddy.
And worst words I guess I ever heard, Dad worked second shift, and the worst words were, "Wait till your daddy gets home." You know, that was the worst words you hear. But, it was such a, I think, in looking back sometime, I think of the European villages where people lived in the towns and they farmed the lands around. If you went into Renfrew and went straight on through on Renfrew and hit Hodges Drive, all the left-hand side down through there was garden spots for people. In fact, Harvey's daddy, I remember seeing him coming up through there one day with a single horse hair sewed up on his shoulders, carrying it back up to his house. He was a strong man.
Yeah.
But anyway, all around we had cow barns for cows. Anybody wanted a cow, had a barn, a pasture. We had places to have pig pens, and a lot of us had pig pens. Everybody, well, I don't know everybody, we did. We had gardens. And in the earlier times when we lived up on the circle, it was always down on the northeast side. There was some fields back down in that area. Later on, when we moved down to the boarding house, there was a plot of land below there that Daddy farmed, and I tried to help. But anyway, there's 4 houses built on that little garden spot now. If you, yeah, so it was, but he had everything from peanuts, sweet potatoes, Irish potatoes, green beans, corn, whatever, you know, the whole 9 yards he had down there. Until one day, Mother, I think Pat and I was the only one left at home, and she walked down there and she said, "Clifford, what do you keep doing this garden for?" I said, "We can buy whatever we need." I said, "Won't you get you a boat and go fishing like everybody else?" That's the nice garden we had. But I just always thought of it as you know, it could have been a self-contained community, because you could raise and we did. We canned like crazy, but up on circle up there, we had two big chanaberry trees in the backyard. And we sat under that and peeled tomatoes and whatever else we were gonna can and stuff like that. And then when it come to hog killing time, we'd, 4 or 5 of the men get together and they'd kill a hog for this one or that one. And now
Except
Harvey's
dad, he did
daddy,
it
when
by
I was,
himself.
I don't know, 12, might have been 13, 14 years old, I don't remember. He'd come by the house and he'd say, he'd get off at 3. And he said, Frank, what you doing? And I said, well, nothing, what you need? He said, you gonna help me kill a hog? We'd go down there, he'd take that old sled he had that he pulled behind that car, he'd drag it down there to the pig pen, lead that hog out and shoot it, put it on the thing, we'd haul it back up to the house and we'd scrape the hair off of it. And by dark, he'd have that thing quartered and lay it on the kitchen table. So, I mean, it was a time, but he'd come by and, I know 3 years running, I helped him. I was probably one of the biggest, still around or something, biggest boy that could help. But anyway, it was such a family affair that we went in and out of each other's house like it was ours. I mean, the boys and, all. And it didn't make any difference. The key that my neighbor had fit my house. Just those skeleton key. We never locked doors. I mean, the doors never locked. And, so it was just, it was a thing that you just, it was a time that, and my older sister, Dora, she's still living down at Beaufort, but she always, we get together, we said we grew up in the greatest time you could grow up in. You never heard of anybody abducting a child. I mean, if it was never heard of drugs, never heard of, anything. Worst thing you ever got into, I guess, was cigarettes. That's the worst thing that ever happened to anybody. But anyway, we got down to the boarding house down there, and usually somewhere on Saturday morning around, I don't know, 6 o'clock, you'd hear this pat, 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 pat. There's Harvey out in my backyard in my basketball goal. But then Larry Abbott, I went by the nickname of Doofy for years and didn't know nothing else. And Larry Abbott named every boy up there, I reckon.
Yes,
and
he did.
It's funny, I had retired from Duke and went to work for Line Equipment Sales, and I was traveling in Charleston. And I get out the Holiday Inn Express in North Charleston, I hear somebody say, Doofy! Charles Turner. I was getting out of the car and he saw me across the parking lot and hollered. But I said, some things you don't ever live down.
No, I didn't either. You don't remember mine.
Frogs?
Frog.
Yeah.
Yep.
By the way, there's people that still call me that. Yeah.
There was Little Frog and Big Frog.
Yeah.
But it was that, Rat and Mouse Clark,
Yeah.
Lord mercy.
Big E range.
Yeah. Called,
Lee Bird. Bird was Lee Bird's, wasn't it?
called,
Towball.
Larry was called Big E.
Towball.
Yeah.
That's right.
Larry Abbott, we called him Big E,
Yeah.
Big Ears. Anyway, we all had names, and it was just a wonderful place. The ball teams, as we came along, Harvey talked about it more than I can, but I saw some of the best ball players that I ever saw playing on the Renfrew Rifles ball
Oh,
team.
yeah.
And the reason was, back then, they could make more in the mill than they could play in pro ball. And I talk back a lot of times, I watched Jack Anderson pitch 1 year for Renfrew, and he was probably one of the greatest pitchers there was. And I saw him hit a home run that went by the steeple by the church in left field out there on the fly. And, but, I mean, there was Cottonwood and Johnny Fox and Sam Knox, oh Lord mercy.
Joe Stewart, do you know?
Joe
him?
Stewart.
Yeah. And, but anyway, they were some great ball players, and we played Texas ball, basketball.
Oh, yeah.
And the mill would rent us 2 rooms at the Greenville Hotel that we'd change clothes
Yes,
in.
that's right.
And we'd walk down to Texas Hall to play ball. But that was quite a time. It was I don't know of a better childhood I could have thought of.
They provided
coming up.
everything you could almost dream of.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and that was just, and they were talking a while ago about the boarders. I can't remember for sure. It was either 25 cents a room or 50 cents a room a week we paid for rent, in a 5-room house. And that included your electricity and your water. And, that was a pretty good deal. Of course, the guys making 40 bucks or something, whatever it was a week or somewhere in that neighborhood. But, it was a time, and, it was a era that we'll never see again. I mean, as far as economics and that sort of thing. My mother always talked about the reason I loved Pepsi Cola so bad. She used to crave it when she was pregnant with me. And it only cost a nickel, I think, or something. She couldn't afford them, so. But that's about, I mean, I could ramble for days, but then we'll leave it there and let Harvey take off.
Well, you know, he talks about a lot of different things. I'm going to talk about one specific thing that created for me all the success really probably I had, and it came from Renfrew because I loved it. You know, the only really bad time of my life was I got in a fight with Frank. He said something about somebody in my family, and so I got in a fight with him. But he was 6'4" now, and I was a little guy, and he was trying to get away from me. He was running to the house, and I was throwing rocks at him, and I ran down to his house, and I'll never forget throwing those rocks and breaking those windows in the boarding house. Time I got home, my dad already knew about them broken windows, and he's gonna have to go fix those in there, and because he was just running from me to keep from killing me. I'm sure of that, because hey, all I did, my day started out about 6:30. That's when you had to eat at our house, and because my dad went to work at 7, but at 6:30 you had to be ready to eat if you're going to eat breakfast. But I wanted to eat breakfast and take off up and shoot ball before school. I always wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do. That was my desire. But my first ball came from Wick Hart.
Yeah.
He lived right down there from me, and when I think I was 12 or 13 maybe, and he gave me a ball for Christmas. He says, you know, I got this ball for you, and so I started working that ball. He said, you got to really be practiced to be good to do this. Mm-hmm. And I won't ever forget playing for Wick over all those years. One time we were going down to play Pelzer, Earl Wooten's team down there, and I was in the 10th grade, and he got us in the car, got me in the car, and while he rode by the house, tooted the horn, and I would think he was riding in that weird car he had. And as we was riding down the road, we get down there, and he forgot all the other players. He had to call Joe Nell to play the rest of the players. That's true. That's Wick. That's classic Wick Hart, right there. Classic. But he forgot all of the other players. But he come by and got me. But I want to tell you, see, he was a special person in that he could overlook anything, bad, good, or indifferent. He could really overlook it. I mean, he'd just go right on. It didn't bother. Well, I know he was just one of those guys. I played baseball for him. You know, well, I want to tell you my first start in baseball was I was the bat boy. They called me Polioik. I don't know why they called me that, but I was like maybe 8, 9 years old. Cottonwood was a star. Roy Foster was a star. All these guys was the star players. They were really good athletes too. And yeah. So I drug bats for them. So, and dragging bats for them when I was that young. When I was 10 or 11, they'd start saying, well, we're going to take infield. You can go out second base and take some balls too. So I'd go take infield with them. You know, I took infield with them for a number of years. And you know, baseball was actually my first game, though basketball ended up the one I ended up with. But baseball was my first game because these guys took me in and told me to go out there and do that. And how to do it. They would show you. They had a lot of patience with me. And I learned to play with the men. So when I was, when I turned 13, when I was an 8th grader, I went out for the high school team and started on the high school team in the 8th grade. And the reason I started is because I knew how to play. I knew how to play early, and I was fortunate to have somebody that had patience with me and took time with me and actually loved me a little. You know, actually that's what everything comes back to. Wick loved us. Oh, he loved us. And I won't ever forget, the last year I played for him, we were going down to Simpsonville to play the Simpsonville Yankees. Needless to say, they were the best team in the league. And we were going down, we had exactly 9 players. And we were in the Woody. He drove a Woody. Huh? Yeah, but he drove that thing down there. He let the back down, was riding down through Malden, and these 2 guys were on the side of the road, and one of them had a glove on his bat, and the other one had a glove in his hand, and they were hitchhiking. And Wick pulled over and says, "You guys want to play today?" He did. He pulled over and said that. You know, he was kind of a bold person anyway. He was bold, but he pulled over and said, "You guys want to play today? We're going down to play the Yankees." They said they were going down to Columbia. I think they were going for a tryout with the Columbia, and I can't remember. It might have been Reds, Cincinnati Reds. I know it was the Columbia team at that time. They were going down to try out for pro team. So we picked up these 2 guys. He said he had a uniform for them too. Don't worry, we were good. And when we got down there at Simpsonville, we go out and our pitcher immediately got bombed in the first inning, and we were behind 8-0. And Wick come over to the guy we picked up, and he said, "You said you were a pitcher?" And he said, "Yeah." And he brought him in the game, and the guy immediately struck out 4 guys, not 3. He struck out 4 because the catcher, Wick, was catching, wasn't used to that, and he couldn't hold him because he threw it kind of hard, really pretty quick. And he said, "What? You were the catcher?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And so the other guy took the catching job, and he had struck out 4 in the first inning. He struck out the side a number of times. We were behind 8-0. But I won't ever forget this. I was first batter of the game, every game I ever played. College, high school, didn't matter. I batted first. So I went up there, but he was, our pitcher was batting second, was Buchanan. Anybody remember? Marvin Buchanan was batting second. And this guy here that was pitching said, "You get on first, kid, I'm going to knock it out of here." And everybody, to this day, only the people that saw the game believe me when I tell them I got on first base, I was first man up, I walked, and he hit it out. I mean, hit it a mile. And you know, it was 8-2 all of a sudden. You know, you take that in your brain, you say, well, that's just made, way you make up stuff. But this is what he did. And that was Red Barbery's last game. Red Barbery is one of the most famous baseball players in South Carolina history. In baseball, he played for the Senators, and he came home to play ball for Mill teams, and he played at Simpsonville.
Before you get too far away from Rick, I've got something. one year the mill hired Wick Hart, Archie Bailey, Pete Kelly, Melvin Poole, and somebody else, who to paint the houses.
Oh, Lord.
They painted the houses, they painted the dogs, they painted the cats.
That was a unique time. That was unique. But Wick was just such a special person. I loved him, because he loved us. I mean, he put soft hand on anybody. He'd make you think you could do anything. He could make you think you could do it. And you know what? It really probably was the thing that saved me. He told me that he wanted me to really work. And of course, moving on, when he pushed me, when I was in high school, he pushed me all the time. Roy Lockerbie was one of my best friends.
Toball's dad.
Huh?
Was that Toball's dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He loved me too, and pushed me, but told me that you can be this, and he'd always see that and I'd look up at games that when I was in college, I'd look up and look in the stands, and there he would sit. I saw a lot of people in the stands that were from Renfrew times,
And
and
we came from a generation where dads encouraged us. Dads
didn't go to games.
Yeah, and
Well-
my dad we didn't have a basketball goal anywhere around our area where our houses were. He took a ring off an old dye barrel.
Yeah.
And welded that thing together and put it up on a tree, and that's where he came to every morning. And we learned that if we swished it, it went down and hit a root and came back
Back to you.
Get over there and go way down by the creek rack.
That's right. Well,
We got good.
our lives revolved. And by the way, she we've always talked about it. My wife is Juanita. She was a C.
S-E-A-Y.
S-E-A-Y, Gordon C's sister.
Yeah, okay.
And she played against Pat.
Lost a lot of
Cause Pat was so. Wait a minute, and we
Now,
shot.
we're talking about Renfrew.
Yeah,
Let's don't get off on
but
that.
when we shot out there on that goal, she was as good as anybody on. And she's good as me. She could beat me anytime.
That shot the first jump shot I ever seen a girl
Yeah,
shoot.
I know she did. She did, and
But our dads encouraged us, they
Yeah.
helped us, they made it possible for us to have practice in things like, my parents probably couldn't afford a piano, but they bought one. And we got lessons and everybody played it wanted to, excuse me.
But I'm gonna tell you the most important thing. She's talking about how it was community. We were, and we used to have these boxing matches.
Yeah.
We had Posey Heights,
That might have been Weeks doing.
Robin Hood.
He was-
No, Robin Hood, Posey Heights. We had Charlie Yates.
Yeah.
We'd get out there beside our house, and I lived at 16 Circle.
Yeah, we was at 10,
They were at 10, we were at
and
16.
the Yates were at 12.
Yeah, they were at 12. So we got down there to boxing. And by the way, you turn around and there's she's right there in the middle of it, ready. Wanting to box. Oh yeah, hey, listen, she can fight as good as any of the guys, and most of the guys were afraid to mess with her.
Because of him.
I know, no, it wasn't because.
It was.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Anyway, we learned to play baseball.
Oh, yeah.
football, everything, right there in that big field in front of the mill.
Well, you know, a lot of good things and sad things happen when you grow up in a neighborhood like that. You have things that hurt you and things that really, but it comes back to help you, you know. You think how that hurt was, and it comes back. All of it comes back. Lee Burns was one of my best friends, and I loved Lee. His dad used to come by, and when we used to play inside the tennis court, we'd play baseball inside the tennis court. We were that little. And we'd get in there and see if we could strike each other out. And we have big games. There's big games in there. And we learned a lot about each other. And we cared about each other, and we talked to each other, you know, about the good things. And you know, it caused me to get an ambition to do something, though. You know, I found out in a hurry when I worked in the mill. I did go to work in the mill when I was like 16, and during the summertime, and you know, it was hard. And I said, yeah, I don't think I might like to do this all the time. This might not be me. But I can tell you, though, that I was always very proud of my dad. He loved people, too. He really did. And, you know, we used to kill a lot of hogs in our backyard. We had a bunch up there because all the people would bring them up there just for...
Big hard to do it.
Yeah, my dad, because he was, hey, much man. And he was talking about carrying that drag harrow. You know, he used to put that thing on his shoulders, and we'd walk from Newt Hodgins' house to our house. And he'd had tied a rope with a horse around. We'd get his mule, Newt's mule, and his drag harrow, and he'd put it up here. So when I was 18, I said, well, you know, that don't look like that's much. Frank, I got news for you. No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't put that thing over my head. It was no way. And that, you know, that's when you think you're strong. He was strong, but he was strong in will too. Oh yes. I burned his peas one time when we picked the seed peas, and my brother and I got in a fight over them. I have a brother named Wayne. He's still at Marietta.
Little ear.
Yeah.
Little frog.
Little frog. He Hornier. Hornier.
That's it.
His name was Hornier. And we got in a fight picking seed peas. We were supposed to pick them all before he come home from work. And we started early in the morning. We had a pretty big field. It was behind our house. We'd moved from 16 to 21 Circle Drive then. That was the boss man house. We had to up our rent, and so we went to there. And we were back there, and we got in a fight over this. So he said, let's burn them. He brought it up for us. He said, let's burn them suckers. He won't know the difference. It was about 1 o'clock. You know, we wasn't thinking real clearly. And so we ended up burning. We had a big fire going with those seed peas, Crowder peas. And he valued his Crowder peas. That was like gold to him. I mean, he had gold. So we had a big fire going, and I looked up the end of the field, and there he was. He came home from work early. Started tearing off limbs walking down to us. He wore us out, and we still had to end up doing those peas. The life he had was, we learned the lesson. But I'm gonna tell you, the people that we grew up with, Pat, Dookie here, don't worry, I was all over his case. You know, and I was always a little bit afraid he was gonna, you know, kill me. Because he would, you know, you always knew which ones to mess with. Anybody remember the name of our dog? The dog, I'm talking about our community dog.
Oh.
Oh, Lord, no.
That Buddy. Buddy, you remember Buddy, the big chow? Buddy the chow was our dog. And he always came up, got run over by the school bus.
Yeah.
He got run over by the school bus. And so, you know, you always remember those type things. And they caught us one time busting out the streetlights. See, you know, we had nice streetlights all the way around, so, and they caught Posey, Heiss, and Darvin Hood, whose daddy was Robin Hood. And his,
The Robin Hood.
that was his dad's
That's his
name.
name.
Robin Hood. And he caught him busting out the streetlights. And when the men had to come around and put them in, oh man, we heard from them, we knew. And all my neighbors, I remember.
They didn't have bucket trucks and they had to take a ladder.
No, they had to get a ladder
Boy
going.
Foster carried that ladder around on his shoulder.
Yeah.
Bag of bulls on the other shoulder.
I want to tell one more story about playing ball. We used to have, when we were kids, we'd play choose up play. And, you know, we'd get out there and you pick one, I pick one, you know. So they always, I had to always pick second. And I always picked him first.
No, last.
I picked him first because the thing was, they'd say, well, I always felt like, I said, well, they're going to make Charlie feel real bad because they're going to pick him last. No, I said, well, I want him first. We'll take him first. And we could usually beat him anyway, couldn't we? We could beat him.
We'd find a way.
We'd find a way and beat him anyway. But that was, you know, I thought that was unique. And I loved his dad, who ran the community store. Wendell, yeah, he used to get on to us because we were bad to bring our knives into the store, you know, and we'd walk around and take our little knife out and stick it in a cake and lick and play.
He's telling y'all the bad side.
We were thinking, well, hey, and when our mothers would come to the store, you know, to buy stuff, we'd say, don't. We'd put the nicks on buying that one. Because, but you could get a haircut for $25. Out there, you could get your
I
hair.
drove that old green pickup truck down to Brandon many times and filled it up, bring back groceries
Oh,
from the
yeah.
store.
We had a library truck that came to.
Yeah.
Yes, and brought books for us to read. Man, I thought I hit the jackpot.
I'm gonna let Charles,
I want
he
Harvey.
knows more, he wants more to tell you, he got
No,
more to
I
tell you.
want Harvey to tell you one more thing. I tell you, I admire this guy, I really do. We went through school, all the way through school. Pat, Harvey, and I were classmates from the first grade all the way through. And I went to North Greenville while Harvey was there playing basketball and baseball. And I dropped out and went to work. Harvey kept grinding away, went on to Wofford and played baseball and basketball at Wofford. Then he went over to Eastside High School. Harvey, why don't you tell them what your
I don't,
what your record was in basketball?
I don't know, but.
You do too.
I have a lot of wins, but, you know.
I looked it up last week in the Travers Rest Hall of Fame book. He taught at about 25 years
Yeah.
at Eastside. His
How was-
teams won 530-something ball games. And lost about 3. I tell you, if he'd have been 6 or 8 inches taller, he'd tore the pros up. Huh? He'd have tore the pros up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But go ahead, Charlie,
Now you-
hey, Charlie has more, he has as many tales as anybody.
Yeah, the company store was the center.
Oh, it was the center. I used to try to do this all the time. And his dad, you know, we tried to play him as a rube, you know. We'd always, you know, and he knew, we were kids. And so we'd go around and sell him some bottles. And then he'd take them out and set them on the back and we'd go get them off the back. Try to sell them back to him. You know, it didn't take a lot. Notice that there ain't no bottles out there. You know. He knew what was going on. Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, thank you. I tell you, this,
I love it,
it's going to be hard to top all this, I tell you. But I am Charles Tate. My parents were Wendell and Catherine Tate. Daddy grew up in the Renfrew area. His father was from that area, and my grandmother was a Hodgins. Going down Hodgins Drive, she grew up back there. You mentioned New
Hodgins.
That was my grandmother's brother.
Yeah.
So if you're going on through Renfrew toward White Horse Road, And Mother grew up in Brandon, right in the shadows of Brandon Mill. Her father worked there, and that was part of Abney Mills, which on Renfrew in later years. Thought I'd take a little different spin on this, some things about Renfrew, how Renfrew got started, and so on. So if you allow me to kind of give you some information. Back in the early 1920s, there was a Renfrew manufacturing company in Adams, Massachusetts. And I never did look that up to see where Adams was related to Boston or anything else, but it was in Massachusetts. And they produced a cloth called Renfrew Devonshire cloth. And it was patented for children's clothes. I think the heavier part of it was kind of a twill type cloth that would be good for making pants, and then there was lighter weight stuff. But anyway, the mill fell on hard times up there and had in the 20s, and because of the southern mills were able to produce cloth cheaper because of lower wages and everything, and it was having an effect on the northern mills. So this particular mill, Renfrew Manufacturing, closed in the 20s. They had agents that sold their cloth out of New York City and sold it all over the country. And those agents were also connected with Brandon Mills down in Brandon, out there in West Greenville. So these agents got to talking, and they connected with Brandon Mills in Greenville, and we began talking about this machinery being available that they could buy and bring down here. So that was in 1925 or so. So in 1927, plans were announced that a plant was going to be built in Travelers Rest where land was cheap and the labor market was good. And they were going to buy that machinery from that liquidated plant and bring it down here and build this plant in Travelers Rest and install that machinery in it. So they bought over 400 acres of land here to build a weave plant and a finishing plant. And then they were going to build between 75 and 80, up in that range, houses to be built for management and the workers, and with estimated cost of the 70 to 80 houses and the factory and all of it, it was between $750,000 and $850,000, which is a lot of money. But you try to build a factory today and 80 houses, and you don't tell them what it would be. But the houses would rent. What information I read, Frank, you mentioned a while ago, was 50 cents per room per month.
Maybe that's what it is.
But a 5-room house would rent for $2.50 a month. And listen to this, this blows your mind. Water and electricity and garbage service and sewer were included. So, you know, but the workers were making an average of $18 every week. So, but the mill had, they started construction of the mill in 1928, and they were going to build a 209 feet by 309 feet bleach house and finishing house. And then they're going to build a 138 by 280 foot weave room. They were going to weave cloth at that time, and then they were going to finish it. The weave room turned out not to be profitable, and they closed it in 1930. Then that space was converted more to manufacturing. Now, if you're familiar with Renfrew, you know that it's hard to realize how the size of the mill, because if you're going out Renfrew Avenue, it's kind of up on a little knoll, and you see the front of it, and you get on around where Pat and Frank grew up that, you can probably look down across it a little bit more. But with a 209 by 309 foot building and another building 138 by 280 feet, that's over 100,000 square feet. If you put 2 football fields side by side, it's bigger than 2 football fields. So it was pretty good size. And then they had a boiler room and,
They had their own generation, they generated their own power.
right, made their own power, boiler room, and then the warehouse. So production was started in 1929, and Renfrew at that time was the 30th textile plant in Greenville County. And close to 400 workers worked in the mill. And during World War II, was their probably busiest time making finishing cloth for the military. They were running 7 days a week and dyeing, finishing cloth for military uniforms. And of course, they were being given the colors and the specs and everything by the military people. In 1949, the plant became part of Abney Mills in Greenville. This corporation now, Abney now owned Renfrew and Brandon Duck Mill and Poinsett Mills, and had plants in Woodruff and Anderson and Belton as well. So they became affiliated with the Abney Mills. In 1961, Abney Mills started selling the houses on the village, and they were selling the houses at 85% of appraised value. Most of the houses sold for in the $4,500 range, and the most expensive one sold for a little over $11,000. And the residents of the house had the first choice if they wanted to buy it or to not buy it. In 1979, Abney sold Renfrew to Allied Kerr, and Kerr sold it to Rocky Mountain Mills in '84, and then in 1988, the mills ceased production. My father worked in the mill as a young man, and later went to work for the company store. After a few years in the company store, they sent him to Greenville, to Brandon stores, right there at Brandon, and he was sent down there to train to be a butcher. And they, of course, cut fresh meat and ground sausage and hamburger and all kind of things. He had a big walk-in cooler, and I remember a lot of times you go in there and see a great old big fish in there. They had a fishing club at Renfrew, and the men of the community had meet upstairs in the over the store and have meals from time to time and get-togethers. But they had fishing club, and they offered prizes, and I think most of the prizes usually were won by Johnny Fox and Smythe and Nelson Coleman and John Vernon.
That's true.
Because they were all big fishermen. They'd go to Greenwood on, that was before Hartwell, they'd go to Greenwood on Saturday and fish all day, and a lot of times 8 or 9 o'clock, somebody knocked on the door and they wanted Daddy to weigh a big fish. He had to weigh the fish, and if it was one they wanted to enter into the contest. But when Daddy was training at Brandon's store in Greenville, he met Mother, and Mother lived right down the street, across the street from Brandon Baptist Church, and the mill was just 100 yards the other way. My grandfather Taylor worked in that mill for years. And Mother and Daddy were married in 1940, and they came to Renfrew. We lived out on Renfrew Avenue, go out to where Dr. Coleman, I believe, lived in the big brown house there, didn't he? And he lived next door. We lived in the next house, and Mr. and Miss Belcher lived in the one next to that. So we lived there for a few years. I was talking to my sister Miriam today. She lives in Virginia now, and I don't remember this. I remember people talking about it, but in 1945, every day at 3 o'clock the whistle blew, and you could hear it. You could hear it all over Travelers Rest.
7 o'clock.
And we're ringing at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, on this day in August 1945, the whistle started blowing, and then it started beep, tooting and everything, and people started blowing the car horns, and everybody's coming out to see what was happening, and women were crying, and the war was over. So it was a big celebration going on. It was a happy day.
One interesting thing is where Spring Park Nursing Home is now.
Yeah,
That was Mr. Smith's farm.
yeah.
Smythe and Nelson's dad
Yeah.
had that, and we used to pick cotton in
Did
those
you really?
fields, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You had to get out of school.
Yeah.
But we lived next to Dr. Coleman, and I don't remember it, but my mother and dad used to tell me that he would ask if I could go along with him, ride with him, if he's going to see somebody. And of course, I'd have to stay in the car. I'm sure he would go in, make house calls, and visit sick. And he also had a office in Travelers Rest, and then that hospital he had. They also had he was also the plant doctor and would call on people if they needed him. Up in the plant, they had a first aid department, and Ms. Lally Allred was the nurse for years, and Roberta is here, and Jim Morgan's here. That was their aim. Is that right, Jim?
Lally was somewhere.
And Lally was Jim's daddy's aunt.
And if you
And
just
then-
needed a mole removed, or if you burnt bad, you saw Grandpa Smith.
Yeah, he could do it,
Talk
yeah.
over it and spit tobacco on it, and you get well.
And after Lally was, and children, I'll go up there if I cut my finger or had a scratch or something, we'd go up there and get a Band-Aid on it. And after Lally left, my aunt, my daddy's sister, Miss Christine Brockman, became nurse up there and stayed up there a long time till she retired. My grandfather helped build the plant and worked in the plant for several years, and then became a gate watchman for a long time. And he and grandmother raised 6 children. They lost one a year old, but they raised 6 children. All the children worked in the mill at one time, and 4 of them actually retired there. In late, Daddy was working at the store, and in the late 40s, he became manager, and we moved over to the house right above the store, and I think that was always designated for the store manager's house. They had a variety of things. They had groceries and fresh meat, fresh vegetables, gasoline, kerosene. They had a barber shop there and a beauty shop. And if you wanted delivery of something, a lot of times the wives would walk out there during the day and order something, and if it was too much to carry, we'd take it to them in the afternoon. Daddy would always have young men in the community to help work there and do things. Frank worked there a while. Doyle Belcher worked there. Jim Crosby, Larry Abbott, and Jack Hayes, and probably a few more that didn't live on Renfrew, that lived off the village somewhere. But and then I remember when Miss Nell Anderson, she's here, right down here, she went to work there as a young lady, and I'm trying to think, did Ruth Evans work there one time? Do you remember if Ruth did? She was Wayne Evans' wife. I'm thinking she did. And then Mary Green married Billy Joe Green. Mary worked there for a while after, and I was just a pretty small kid, but I remember a lot of that. In 1950, the groceries were discontinued from the store. I don't know, I'm just kind of anticipating thinking this, that there were more stores opening. There was Willis and Travelers Rest, and there was Batson that was a bigger store, and then people were going into Greenville more, and cash and carry was off and running, and people were talking like, so anyway, I guess they wasn't really in the grocery business. It was a convenience to the people there at the village, I guess. It served its purpose, and it was a good time, everybody, but they discontinued it, and they'd already started putting some remnants from the mill, short pieces in there, and people were buying them, and it was lightweight broadcloth. It was good for making ladies' blouses and shirts and that kind of thing. So they took the groceries out in 1950s and made it just a cloth store, and then after a few years, it was up and running pretty well, and somebody from Mr. Smith or somebody from the management came to see Daddy and offered to sell them the business, the cloth business, and just run them the building. So that seemed to work out pretty well for both sides. So Mother and Daddy bought the building, and in the,
Probably Mr. John I. Smith.
probably so. Probably in the mid-50s sometime, in 55 or 56, somewhere along in there. And had the cloth shop, renamed it Tate's Cloth Shop. Daddy began getting orders from all over the country for this broadcloth. They were selling it for 50 or 60 cents a pound, and he'd go up to the plant every morning, and he had a station wagon. He'd come back, and that back of that wagon would be stuffed full of remnants. There'd be pieces 3 and 4 yards, and maybe some pieces 10 yards, and some of them just rag size, you know. But people come in there and buy that stuff, and word started getting out that they could buy that cheap, and boy, it was a good thing for a long time. I want to talk a little about the upstairs, the Renfrew Hall. Everybody remembers it. It was a big room upstairs. They had a kitchen over in the corner and had stove and range and all, and it was used for a lot of things. Most of the young people remember the square dances up there after the football games, and it would, I think Clint Farmer called the square dances, didn't he? I think.
Yeah.
And
Charlie Green.
they had a good time up there, and then it was rented out a lot for family get-togethers. My dad's family, there were 6 of them, and they're all the cousins. We'd have Papa Tate's birthday dinner up there in March, and then in Christmas we'd have Christmas get-together, and then the men would have, they had a community club. They'd get together several times a year and have a oyster stew or fry fish or do something, and it was.
Remember when Mr. Herman had the gym up there, that the mill furnished it out with all kind of weights and stuff?
Right, they had weights up there.
I used to be foolish enough to spar with Wick.
Yeah.
He'd beat my head off.
One thing I remember well, when they were having a community club meeting one night, and out in the park, I'd ride bicycle out through there, and we had a horse. I'd ride my horse out through there, and I'd find a lot of baseballs laying around that the ball boy didn't find, you know. So I'd always have several balls laying around, and Daddy come home. I loved to play throw and catch with Daddy, and we'd get out there and throw. But he's gone to the community club meeting one night, and he hadn't been gone long. He came home. He said, "Get me one of your baseballs." I said, "What you need? What for?" He said, "I'll tell you later." So he carried it back with him, and they had a speaker named Lou Brissy.
Yeah.
Came to speak to him. And Lou Brissy
Famous guy.
was from upper South Carolina, grew up in Anderson and Ware Shoals over in that way. And he was a really, really good baseball player, a pitcher. And he got drafted in the Army during the war, and he got wounded over in France. I looked all this up on the internet. I didn't remember all this. I looked it up the other night. He was in France and got shot, had a bad leg wound, and they wanted to take his leg off. And he begged them not to. He said, "I'm a baseball pitcher." Said, I want to keep my leg. He said, "Try to save it if you can."
Yes.
So they saved his leg. He came home, and he pitched for 7 or 8 years with Cleveland and Kansas City, I believe.
Yeah.
Then he retired, but he was like Earl Wooten. You see his picture in the paper about every week.
Yes.
He was speaker, or he was at a banquet, or he was making a talk somewhere. But then so I had an autographed ball. Kept it for years. I don't know what happened to it. I can't find it. I must have lost it. But,
Probably got some value lost.
yeah. But the community club was a good thing for the men, and then they pooled some money and bought a TV. Most people didn't have a TV at home. They were just starting to come out, and put a TV up in the community room up there. And on Saturday afternoon, you could go out and watch Dizzy Dean broadcast baseball.
Yeah.
Sometimes Dizzy was better than the ball, but
I have a good story about that. We were wanting to watch Rocky Marciano fight Ezra Charles, and we didn't have the key to community hall, but we knew how to. I could hold Posey high
climb in the window.
and climb in the window, and we could go in and watch on TV. And we broke in that night to watch that fight, and it only lasted 1 minute and 52 seconds. And so there we put all that trouble for 1:52 seconds. So we went on back home, we said, that's over. That really tore us up because,
Yeah, I was gonna mention that it was open on Wednesday night a lot of times.
yeah.
A lot of times for boxing.
Yeah.
But the Renfrew men love baseball, and
Oh.
it's already been talked about. They were some good ball players up there. I enjoyed watching them play. And before the high school moved over here where we are now, the high school team played up there.
Yeah,
For years.
I did.
Yeah,
I played my first year.
did you? But I enjoyed living at Renfrew. It's already been mentioned, everybody kind of hung together. Everybody's kind of knew each other. It made a lot of good friends up there, and I still run into people often that I knew years ago. I saw Jeff Plumby a few weeks ago.
Is that right?
And I hadn't seen him in a long time. I said, Jeff, you know who I said, sure, I know who you are. Anyway, we talked a while, and we had a lot of good times. I always enjoyed running into people and chatting a few minutes. I'd like to give some credits to some things where I got a lot of my information. These Abney Mills Quills books, and they're very valuable and a lot of information. Also, Marion Cooper Bryan's book, Mr. Man Batson's book, and Judy Bainbridge poster. If you look over here on this table, you see framed, leaning against the wall, a poster, and it shows the front office, it shows the mill, and it shows the two churches, and it's Renfrew community. Now, what you can't see on the back of that photograph, Miss Judy Bainbridge, historian in Greenville and was formerly at Furman, I think, has written a great history detail, and you can buy that poster. I looked it up on the internet the other night. It's like $12 down at Greenville County Square at the Greater Greenville.
If they got them.
If they got them, I don't
Because
know.
they've run out of some of them and
Did
they
they?
have
Well-
reprinted. But that one's for sale, is anybody else?
Well, and if you get one, take it to a print shop, let them print the other part on the back, because all this information. There's a lot of good information about the mill. I know y'all probably get, I've got one more thing I want to read, and this is really good, I think. If you allow me to read it. Most everybody that ever worked at Renfrew or remember Mr. and Ms. Meese. Y'all know Mr. and Ms. Meese. And they lived over on the hill where the boss men lived. And Ms. Meese, she was really something.
She had peacocks.
Had peacocks. You could hear those things scream for country mile, I tell you. But when this plant, Renfrew Manufacturing Company, was in Massachusetts, 3 men moved down here after they closed that plant, and after they were going to build a plant here. They'd bought their machinery, they'd bought their copyright, they were going to use the name Renfrew. So they talked these 3 men into coming down here and running this plant and getting it started. And Charles Meese, he spelled his name M-I-E-S, was the way it was spelled. And then Mr. Turtlelot. And we had, I believe, Mr. Turtlelot's son several years ago. Is that right, Doc? His son spoke to this group just a few years ago. And but Mr. Turtlelot came, and then he stayed with them for a number of years, and then he moved on or retired, I don't know which. And then there was a Mr. Eddie. But this is a little story. This was in the Quills in article in 1957. And I just want to read it, if you'll allow me to. The story of Renfrew would not be complete without a tribute to the employees who have always shown a splendid spirit of cooperation and loyalty. To them, in large measure, is due the credit for Renfrew's reputation and quality and service. During the war years, the record of sales of United States savings bonds to Renfrew employees was always at top level. Renfrew Bleachery was one of only 2 textile plants in Greenville County eligible to fly the Treasury Department's T flag. During the entire war, that could fly it during the whole war, signifying that at least 90% of the employees were buying war bonds in the amount at least 10% of the payroll. In the Red Cross, Community Chest, and United Fund drives, Renfrew employees have always stood out at the top or near the top among all the textile plants in Greenville County. That people like to work at Renfrew is evidenced by the fact that at this time 391 employees now on the payroll, 31 have been continuously employed for 25 years or more, and 183 from 10 to 25 years.
Wow.
Thank you.
I want to thank our panel tonight for your time, for your interesting stories, and for treating us to some nostalgic moments. We wish that life today were this peaceful, that we could look back and say that we just had our family support and our community support. So it was a very idyllic time. And thank you for sharing that with us tonight.